welcome to another episode at the
We Are podcast. So today's episode, you probably noticed, we're posting this on Saturday instead of Monday or Friday, but that's because Saturday is a very important day. It's 9/11, which was the day. It's the 20-year anniversary of the 9/11 attack, which happened on September 11th, 2001. So it's affected so many people in our country, and it's really important to talk about.
Yeah.
So we're just gonna talk about all the
we're gonna be talking about the history, what happened on the day, some heroes at the event, and the lasting impact on our society. And by the way, if I sound a little congested, it's because I am. I had a little bit of a cold, but it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It lasted
probably got it from me, honestly.
Probably. Anyway,
but so first we're gonna start off with background of the terrorist group that was the main kind of cause of it, and the background even before that. So
all right, ready?
Let's get ready and get into this. Okay, so all of this kind of started a long time ago. There were a lot of historical events that kind of played a part in what happened that day and kind of caused them or created them to happen. So the Afghan-Soviet War, which took place in 1979, was one of the leading causes that kind of led to Islamic extremist groups and the Al-Qaeda group that took part in the 9/11 attack.
So what was that? What was
that
invasion?
So the
the Soviet one.
So the communist bloc wanted to spread the empire and started with the Middle East. So this was during the Soviet War or the Soviet Union.
So what's the Soviet Union?
So the Soviet Union was they had fundamentalist values in communism. So communism.
No, but what were they? Who were they?
Russia.
Yes,
Russia.
that's it.
Okay, that's what you were asking. So it was Russia at the time.
Yeah.
So they had values in communism, and communism is basically it's kind of extreme. It's the opposite of capitalism. So capitalism is the harder you work, the more money you make, right? But communism is more everyone has equal. Everyone is equal to the point where it's you'd be waiting in line for 10 hours to get a piece of bread, right?
I think a good example for that is to say that it's equal, not fair.
Mm-hmm.
So it's someone. Someone who works 10 hours and as a doctor would get the same wage as someone who worked at a donut shop.
And to put this into perspective, we all have that teacher who gives everyone 100% on everything, even that student who spent 20 hours on it and the student who rushed and spent 2 minutes on it.
Yeah.
That teacher would give them both 100. Whereas
that's communism.
That's how I see it, honestly.
Yeah.
It's kind of an analogy. Whereas capitalism would be the kid who spent 20 hours would get 100, while the other kid would get a D. So that's just explaining it. So the oil industry in the Middle East was super powerful at the time, and Arab secular nationalism, which supported socialism. By the way, socialism is very similar to communism. They're basically fundamentally the same. But they had a stronghold in countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Jordan. And the Soviets grew relations with these countries. So during 1978, the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, which I'm just going to call the PDPA for short, because it's a really long name, they committed a coup to the Afghanistan president. So they basically just took over. They're just we're taking over, right? So, and then Taraki, who was kind of the main leader of the PDPA, he became the dictator of the country. So, his name is Noor Mohammad Taraki, that was his full name. So, he was really close with the Soviet Union. He had very socialist ideals, and in the Soviet Union, they had kind of an allyship or a friendship. They were close. So, the Afghans did not like this. They did not like these socialist ideals, and they didn't like this random force kind of taking over, so they fought back, and they started a resistance group called the Mujahideen, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Excuse me if I pronounce it wrong.
By the way, I watched a documentary on it, a 2-hour documentary on Netflix called The Turning Point 9/11 and The Rise to Power or something.
Right.
I will cite it, but they talk about all of this.
I have to cite the podcast that I listen to. I listen to a podcast.
Yeah, but we'll cite those both, and you can check them out because they talk about this as well.
Okay, so Taraki and the leaders of the PDPA issued a lot of policies which challenged traditional Afghan values, and Afghanistan had never really had a strong centralized government for thousands of years. So this was so new to them, and suddenly their values were being challenged and they were being taken over, and they obviously did not like that, right? But then the leadership fell when Taraki, who was like the dictator, he went to Cuba, and one of the other people in the PDPA, who was like kind of lower down but was still a part of it, he actually arrested Taraki and took over. So his name was Hafizullah Amin, and he just took control of the government and arrested Taraki. So then the Soviet Union, they did not like that, right? Because they were allies with Taraki, and they're just like, no, this isn't happening. So they went over and assassinated Amin and they invaded Afghanistan and took control. So in 1980, Barbara Kamal became the president and was implemented by the Soviets. So the Pakistani government actually started like this group to train Afghan fighters to fight against the Soviet Union because they were very unhappy. So the Soviet war fundamentally, like, it started when the Soviets infiltrated the Afghan government and they tried to persuade the Afghans to like believe their ideals. The group of fighters, as I said, was called the Mujahideen, and there were different factions of the group. Like, they didn't all share the same ideologies, but they were coming together with a common cause, which was like a common enemy, basically. They wanted to resist against that common enemy. So the US actually supported the Mujahideen and was giving them, like, funneling them money and like weapons and stuff to support them. But then, let's see. During the 90s, the US and the Soviet Union actually signed an agreement saying the US will no longer fund the Mujahideen if the Soviet Union will withdraw from Afghanistan. So the Soviet Union withdrew and the US stopped funding them, right? So that happened. And then basically there was no government in Afghanistan, and there's this group, the Mujahideen, and they all had like, they had a common enemy before, but they have differing views. Like, some of them are like want to see an Islamic government, while some of them just feel repressed, and some of them are actually people from the Communist Party's military who don't agree with the Communist Party, right?
Yeah.
So a civil war broke out in Afghanistan because these factions had such opposing views, and there was no government to rule over them. So they tried to agree on a transitional government, but one of the presidents, who was leader of the Islamic Society, which was one of the different factions, refused to leave office in 1994, and there was supposed to be a power sharing agreement that they were supposed to come to, right? So the other factions got really mad, and they started like surrounding Kabul, and basically Afghanistan just slipped into chaos because there was no government, no one could agree on anything. So then this is when the Taliban kind of came into power and started rising and began seizing control. And then Osama bin Laden kind of ties into this. So he was part of the Mujahideen. He grew up in a very wealthy family. He was born in 1957, and he was Islamic, and along with Abdullah Azzam, who was a mentor of bin Laden, the men grew a financial network when the Soviets withdrew. So when the US and the Soviets signed that agreement, they created Al-Qaeda. And Ahana will talk about that more in depth a little bit later. But the purpose was to fight future holy wars, right? So Azzam was assassinated, and then bin Laden became the leader of Al-Qaeda, and he returned to Saudi Arabia. So the Saudi government had allowed US troops to be stationed in Saudi Arabia, which really made bin Laden mad. There were a lot of actions that kind of built up from the US that bin Laden did not like, and he just became very angered over time. So following the Iraq invasion of Kuwait in 1990, bin Laden had offered to defend Saudi Arabia with his Arab Legion, but the Saudi royals were like, no, we want the US to come and bring their troops here and defend us, not you. So he was very mad about that. And that's kind of when this hatred started. And then he was expelled from Saudi Arabia because of his anti-government actions and views. So he took refuge in Sudan, and later on, US servicemen who were part of a humanitarian mission in Somalia were killed, and Americans withdrew soon after. And he saw this as kind of like a weak move on part of the Americans, like, oh, some of them were killed, so they just left, right? So that also angered him. And Then he goes on to declare a holy war on the U.S. forces, and that led to the 9/11 attacks. So he wanted a global jihad against the U.S., which is like a struggle or fight against the enemies of Islam. So he saw the U.S. as a major enemy of Islam, and there were many things that just angered him over time that kind of led to that and led to him starting Al-Qaeda.
Okay, so basically what all that means is that Osama bin Laden was a part of a terrorist group called Al-Qaeda, and they believed that anyone who isn't Islam and didn't believe in like the Islam like traditions of religion, their viewpoint of Islam was like not worthy and should die, honestly. So I'm gonna talk a little bit more about Al-Qaeda and what it is. So it's a terrorist group founded by bin Laden in the 1980s. I think it was 1988, and it was centered around radical Islamic beliefs. And it merged with like a bunch of other militant Islamic organizations, including the Jihad, which Celine was talking about. And several leaders declared holy war against the U.S. And this was like this organization was like very like focused on basically like converting people to Islam and like punishing people that were Islam and like basically doing all these things so that people would understand the importance of what they thought was like the holy religion.
Right.
They did several like suicide attacks, including Tanzania, which is the 1998 suicide bomb attacks against the U.S. warship Cole in Aden, Yemen. He also did several other attacks. There's just been like so many attacks everywhere, not even just in the U.S. and India, which is because they kind of have a rivalry with Afghanistan. So this also kind of Al-Qaeda was like the group behind the 9/11 attacks, and during the 9/11, like many consider Osama bin Laden the mastermind of it. And in 2001, 19 militants associated with Al-Qaeda staged these September 11 attacks. And within weeks, like the U.S. was so frustrated. The Bush administration, George Bush, who like actually led the government during this time, he was the president at the time. He sent thousands of troops to Afghanistan, which kind of started like what we were talking about in our news updates, the long 20-year war with Afghans.
Exactly.
So they actually were able to capture many people, but that's basically the background behind Osama bin Laden. And actually, he was killed, unfortunately, on May 2nd of 2011, which was like 10 years after the 9/11 attacks, by military forces after they located him in a secure compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, 31 miles away from Islamabad. Which honestly is so surprising to me because he survived 10 years.
Yeah, because one of our main goals going into Afghanistan, putting our troops there, was to kill him, you know?
I think I also want to mention something about like the Mujahideen. I probably say that wrong, but
I don't know.
Mujahideen or something. Mujahideen. I don't know.
I hope we're pronouncing this right.
But the Mujahideen people, like I said, but like I just want to say something real fast, is that they actually had like one of their leaders, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. Oh God.
Hekmatyar?
Yeah, Hekmatyar. I don't know. He was like one of the strongest leaders in the Mujahideen, and he actually at the time in Afghanistan, girls would like go to university and they wore skirts and they didn't have head coverings. They were way more freer than today, which is really weird to me because you would have taken it as the opposite.
Yeah. Actually, the weird thing was during the Soviet Union when they like took over, women had a lot more rights. I mean, they were harsh, like they would just kill people if they didn't support communism, but they did also give a lot of people like rights.
Yeah, but basically they would wear skirts and stuff, and this Mujahideen leader actually, whose name was like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar or something, he actually threw acid in the faces of girls at the Kabul University.
Oh my God.
So if you guys don't understand like why are the Mujahideen like bad news, that's why. They are misogynistic, and although they did try to drive out the Soviet Union, it was for selfish reasons. But now let's talk about like what actually happened.
Like what happened on that exact day. So as we said, it was September 11th, 2001. A lot of people, I've seen accounts from people and heard them, and they said that it just seemed like a totally normal day, right? It was just like a beautiful September day. Yeah. So why don't you tell us like what happened a little bit, like?
So I'm gonna give a little bit background on the buildings. I'm sure Salim will do too.
Yeah.
So the two. Okay, so there were like three major like strikes.
Right.
Basically, one of them was, and the major ones were on the Twin Towers, which the Twin Towers are these two large towers in New York.
They're in the World Trade Center.
Yeah, they're in the World Trade
The
Center.
South and North.
Yeah, they're the two towers and the World Trade Center in New York City. And it was built in the 60s and 70s by Port Authority, where their headquarters were. And power brokers wanted to build these two towers, the World Trade Center, for commerce and world trade, including the Rockefellers, which is like a family that's very influential in business and stuff.
Yeah. And another spot that was also hit, which was the Pentagon, was like, it was kind of a base for like military, like the Navy, the Army. So.
Yeah, the Pentagon is like a central U.S. intelligence base.
So these were all like major targets, right? Where we have very critical, like, they're vulnerable spots, like that are like major.
I mean, they did that for a point. Like the Twin Towers are like a staple of New York City. They're something where the U.S. considers like their World Trade Center. That's a big deal.
Exactly.
And the Pentagon, obviously. Also, there was a fourth plane that was hijacked that was going to crash into the Capitol, people think, but we'll talk about that later. But actually what happened...
that survived.
Right? I mean, not really survived.
Or not, but...
Yeah, but basically the passengers on board took over that plane and were able to divert it from going to the Capitol. But we'll talk about that later. Anyway, so that was like the background of like the city. So let's talk about like the Twin Cities and like what happened there. Or the Twin Towers.
The Twin Towers, okay. So at the Twin Towers, let's see. So as we said,
okay. So
I was trying to find it here. Okay, so at 8:21 a.m. Eastern time, a call was made to American Airlines Emergency that there was someone from American Airlines there monitoring from Flight 11.
Yeah.
So someone who could potentially be a threat, right? So she said a flight attendant was, quote, advising the reps that the pilot, everyone's been stabbed. The person on the emergency was responded saying that this was a confirmed hijacking. So hijacking is when someone who's trying to like kind of like take part in a violent act, I guess, kind of like takes over something. Yeah, it's kind of and the hijackers turned his transponder off, so they don't have a definitive altitude, but they think he's descending.
So basically what happened was like they got a call from the flight attendant and they were like trying to figure out what's happening, and at the time no one knew like what was happening because all the like airport security, like what we consider normal now, was way different back then. Like they didn't have as much security. They didn't make you scan or take off your shoes, so they didn't really know that anyone on this plane was a threat.
Yeah, and I also heard that when the Twin Towers were hit, like at first, when the first one was hit, people thought it was just like an accident, but when the second one was hit, that's when we realized like this is an attack, right?
Yeah.
By terrorists.
But they realized that the airplane was starting to head towards the towers in New York City. So a person named
Glogowski,
she was an employee at the Twin Towers, and she said that at 8:45, in the silence of the room, because the buildings were silent, it sounded loud explosion noise, and she heard this huge boom, and there was actually like a live stream done by, I think it was Fox News, where you could hear like the big explosion, and a plane was crashed into one of the towers on the side.
Right.
And tens of thousands of people work in these buildings. I mean,
people just going about their day-to-day life, not expecting anything to happen.
Definitely. And I heard an analogy even that they would consider like the Twin Towers area like a city inside of the city. There would be up to like 80,000 people there in a day.
Right.
And so the next thing she described feeling was that the buildings were shaking violently. Like they were rumbling and shaking.
A lot of people say to this day they can still remember like the shaking of the building and like the rubble and what they saw. Like we'll get into like stories and personal accounts later on, but it's now do you want to talk about like the Pentagon?
Oh wait, we have to talk about the other plane.
Oh right.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
So at 9:03, which is like a couple of like probably 40 minutes after the first plane hit. The plane, which was United 175, became clear that it wasn't just like an accident, because this plane, United 175, was descending. There was actually a phone call recorded, and the first man says, "Look out your window," and the second one says, Yeah, and then he says, do you see an airplane descending at around 4,000 feet elevation? And he says, yes, I do. And then you could see the plane blatantly crashing into the side of the South Tower, which was the second one to be hit. And it was awful. I mean, the people, like, at the time, they thought it was an accident, but when that second plane hit, they knew
That's when they knew it's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
It's a terrorist attack.
It's awful. And I think it was really, like, a big pivotal moment because people didn't know what to do. They were terrified.
Yeah,
It was chaos.
It was complete chaos, right?
Yeah.
So, wow.
Yeah. And
So,
actually, I think after, and then the third aircraft, which went into like Washington D.C., hit the Pentagon.
Hit the Pentagon,
So that was American 77, and it was from American Airlines. It was another one that got hijacked, and it went straight into the side of the Pentagon. And I was listening to a first-hand account of someone from the Pentagon. They were talking about how she was like in the Pentagon and she could hear smoke and they were just crawling and their lungs were like bursting.
Yeah, a lot of people the smoke made them, like, that's when they first realized something was happening because they could smell smoke.
And also they described things as being hot, like the windows were hot and stuff.
Right. So it's really sad because 125 people were killed at the Pentagon.
Yeah.
The plane that struck the Pentagon was American Airlines Flight 77. Did you say that word?
I said that. Yeah.
Okay. But it was scheduled to go to Los Angeles National Airport when it was hijacked, and the crew had 53 passengers and 5 hijackers.
Yeah.
So the hijackers stormed the cockpit and forced the passengers, crew, and pilots to the rear end of the aircraft less than 35 minutes into the flight. Just imagine being on that flight and then these people just force you, like, that would be so unexpected.
And then especially for the people in the Pentagon at the time, that must have been so scary.
Oh yeah.
And I actually also have like my mom actually worked right next to the Pentagon when it happened.
Oh my gosh.
So there's like a Pentagon, and then there's a road, like a highway or something, and then on the other side there's a strip of buildings, like work offices.
Right.
My mom worked in one, and we were watching this documentary, and she's like, I worked in that building. You can see it from the Pentagon. And it was like directly across.
Does she still remember like what happened?
Oh, she does. She said, I can't describe to you how scary it was not knowing what's going to happen next. But at the time, just again, the news was like saying like, oh, this might be a terrorist attack. But people in the building all across that strip just thought the Pentagon got a fire because of like some emergency or something.
Right.
They didn't know that it was a plane crash. They just thought it was
They didn't know
fire.
it was intentional either.
They saw the smoke, and my mom, when she got in the car, she had like this sinking feeling, and then she watched the news and she heard that it was a terrorist attack. And it's terrifying for so many people.
And a lot of people still remember it today and have lasting effects, which we will discuss in the second half, like the mental aspect of it all.
Yeah.
But Hani Hanjour, who was one of the hijackers, assumed control of the plane, and at 9:37 a.m. the plane crashed into the western side of the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And actually, the Pentagon had to be reconstructed in 2002. It took $500 million, but we were able to reconstruct it on September 11th, 2002. We finished, which was like the year after it happened, so it's kind of symbolic. But
yeah, I think most of the reconstruction took up to 8 months, which was like insane.
And it's something that, like, even if we can reconstruct stuff, and even if we can like get rid of all the rubble and clean up, it's still gonna be a part of our history, and we're still gonna remember it no matter what, you know. So
alright, now for like the last major plane story.
Oh, the plane that
plane that took back its plane. So this plane was the plane United 93. Many people on this like airline actually were able to like acquire cell phones and call their families. They were. I heard when it was devastating. This mother called her kids and she says, "Hi, babies. I just want you to know that I love you, and something's wrong with the plane, but just know that I love you so much, and you'll get through it."
That's so sad.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And so there was phone calls recorded. You could hear people, but a group of the planes, after it got hijacked, a group of the civilians on the plane actually decided that, okay, we're probably going to die no matter what, but we're not going to let the people in the Capitol die too. So the brave group of passengers stormed the cockpit where the hijackers were located. And they were able to kind of like distract them, and take it over so that it crashed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. So all of the passengers on the plane did die, but they also prevented thousands of deaths potentially.
That's so heroic. Like,
yeah,
think of how brave they're like, we know we're gonna die, so we might as well save so many lives.
Yeah. So that was, I feel like that's one of the bravest things you could possibly do.
I think it's just beautiful that it's beautiful. So
yeah, it was insane. I think what they did was just so good. But
I think that is one of the best things about our country, that we have people like that, who will just are willing to sacrifice everything to save lives. I think that's amazing.
Anyway, so there was a lot of there you could hear some kind of the phones and some voices of the terrorists during this part, but I'm not going to get into that because we have a limited amount of time. But I just want to emphasize this again. No one knew it was going to happen. Actually, our social studies teacher in 6th grade had a husband who was a pilot who was actually flying the flight at the time, and she thought maybe that he got maybe he was getting hijacked too. But luckily he was safe. He was a single pilot, flying with goods, I think. So
and I think it was also scary, even if you weren't physically involved in the attack, knowing someone who was there and having that fear about their life or losing someone, which we'll talk about a lot in the second half.
All right, so are we done with the first half?
I think we are. So second half is more mentally how that impacts people, how it still impacts people even 20 years later in our country, and so please stay tuned.
All right, bye.
Bye.
I'm Hannah.
And I'm Celine.
And welcome back to the break.
Wait, we don't introduce ourselves back from the break, though.
Yeah, but welcome back.
Okay, welcome back. If you don't know our names already, and
scoot over.
Excuse me, don't push me like I'm some.
Okay. Anyway, so in honor of 9/11, we've been covering it for this episode, and now we're going to be talking about more the mental and long-lasting impact of things.
So and everything that goes along with that.
Okay, so first off, Celine's going to be talking about the story of some 9/11 survivors.
Yeah, some of these are all very varying stories. Some people weren't even involved in the attack; they just know someone who was, and just the different impacts they have in different age groups and different people. So I'm gonna leave the story of the hero for last, to end off on a good note. Okay, let's talk about Rob Riley, who is just a citizen who is just living his life, going through the actions of his day, and he said he still remembers everything vividly to this day. He said it was, quote, probably the most beautiful day we've had in a long time. A lot of people have said that, it was just a beautiful September day, So he went to work at 7 that day, and at the offices of the 25th and 26th Towers, which was in the Twin Towers, in the World Trade Center. I feel like just going from thinking it'll be a normal day and going on with your life to something that's surprising happening, I feel like the element of surprise made it so much harder for a lot of people, mentally, right? It makes it very traumatic. Riley says he can even remember the building swaying. He said, quote, when we got across to the other side and you looked up and you saw those holes in the flames and then people waving towels like, help, please help, they're stranded, they're stuck. Then you start looking up, you're in amazement. You're like, what was that? And something, then you see it again. And then you realize it's people jumping. At one point, 4 people held hands and jumped. How hard it had to be to know that you're jumping to your death.
That's
so
awful.
He had to watch people jump to their death because there were fires. So it's you either
was
die
that
from
the
the fire.
Pentagon or the towers?
It was at the towers.
Okay.
So it's you either die from the fire or you die from jumping down together. And these people were holding hands and jumping down together. And that's really sad.
I also heard a story at the Pentagon about from this colonel. She was in the documentary I was talking about earlier, but she was saying how she was stuck and she felt it was her responsibility to get people out. And they would literally jump out of the windows, and luckily they survived, but she had burns and she had severe lung damage from the smoke, so a lot of people thought they wouldn't even make it.
Yeah, and just seeing people have to jump to their deaths is so traumatic, Riley said that families will never forget the fear they felt. He has a son. At the time, he had a son in kindergarten, and his wife picked up their son. His son asked his wife if he was dead, and at that point, the wife didn't know. She didn't know what was happening. She couldn't tell the son, oh yeah, he's totally fine, he's alive, because she didn't know. So it was so hard for people, the wife and the kid too, who knew someone in the attack. And Riley said he went to 30 to 50 memorials after this. That's a lot of people. Like, he said, quote, these memorials we'd go to, there would just be pictures of all our friends hanging around, little children running around, sometimes a wife who was still pregnant. That's so sad.
That's awful.
Who lost her husband.
Yeah.
It was surreal. No one had a body to bury. No one found anyone. He said, quote, the Wall Street, the brokerage, they were a fraternity. So imagine, these are all your fraternity brothers. Imagine losing those people.
Yeah.
Like, losing family and losing coworkers and employees and friends. And he said he will never forget that day. So, all right. So next we have oh my gosh, I just scrolled down too much. The story of a 16-year-old who was just going about her normal day in high school when the attack happened. So her name was Christina Lozano, and she was 16 at the time and attending Mary Bergtraum High School, which was blocks away from the Twin Towers, so it was right next to it. So she said by the time the plane hit, she was in English class. She can still remember the school building shaking and being hit by debris.
Yeah.
And these are like high schoolers.
No, debris was everywhere. There was like burning papers floating around. It was insane.
And people actually were like hit by the rubble and like under the rubble. So her school was evacuated soon after, and no trains were running. A lot of roads were blocked. So she said she and her friend had to find a way home, and they finally found a bridge to Brooklyn. She said, quote, I remember running on the Manhattan Bridge with my friend Sonia and someone actually saying there's another plane coming, which everyone said to run. This was really scary for her. She did make it out and she was okay, but she said she still has effects, like mental effects after the attack. She said she struggled to sleep and felt easily anxious, and she's very paranoid about loud noises. A lot of people with PTSD, when something either triggers them or when a loud noise comes, it gives them a lot of anxiety and kind of brings back memories that they don't want to think about. And researchers say that people who experience the event were more likely to develop depression or PTSD, which makes sense.
Obviously.
So, yeah, being that young and having those lasting effects, even 20 years after the attack.
And I heard a lot of people had like survivor's guilt too.
Oh, and survivor's guilt, let's talk about that for a little
bit.
It's where like you start thinking like, why was I the one who survived when so many other people died? And it makes you feel guilty that you survived when other people didn't.
Yeah, it makes you think that like you could have done something, or like
or you could have done something,
or
you didn't deserve to be alive when so many people died. And that's so hard to face because it was 100% not their fault, right?
Yeah.
So that's another aspect of it, along with anxiety and PTSD and a lot of anger, I feel like, towards the people who did the attack. So then I have the story of a girl who is actually 10 months old. She doesn't really remember her father, but her father died during the attack, and this has affected her whole life. Even though she wasn't a part of it and physically there. So her father was Leroy Homer, and he was a co-pilot of the United Flight 93. He died during the 9/11 attack. So as I said, Laurel Homer was only 10 months old when her father was killed. She said, quote, I don't know that much. It's something that I just don't ask about. And she said that walling off her dad's death and not thinking about it has been like a coping mechanism because she feels different from other kids. Like she feels weird, like she has this thing
especially since
that
you've
happened.
never really known him.
Right, and she doesn't have a dad, right? And she feels like it's been a protective measure to just not think about it. And she was very ashamed of it, she said, because it made her feel vulnerable and different. So she was very traumatized from a young age, and she said, quote, the way my mom explained it to me was that there were bad men on the plane and that he was gone because of those bad men. So that basically made me terrified of all men, including family members, strangers, and everybody. So I think it's another aspect of paranoia, like when something like that happens, like obviously she was so young, so now she's thinking like all men are evil, right? Because these men were the ones who killed her dad. So
that's also I feel like that's a recurring thing. I've heard stories about people like this is unrelated, but people who've been abused by men and then they think all men are evil.
Right, exactly.
Or they just have
even
trauma surrounding them.
Even if it's a small group of people, it's like they start thinking that like everyone is like that because they're so traumatized.
And also I think that has something to do with race as well, which I'll talk about in the last different thing.
Right. So she went to child therapy in a summer camp for children who lost parents during 9/11, and she said that helped. She said it's a hard place when you saw a future that you never got to have with her dad. And she's now 20 and starting her senior year at Rutgers University and majoring in companion animal science. That's pretty cool. She said she likes to avoid memorial services because it just kind of like triggers her, I guess, or just and she said there's constant reminders everywhere of what that day meant for her and her family. Even though she wasn't there, that day impacted her and her family so greatly. And to honor Leroy Homer's legacy, who's the father who died, Laurel's mother, Melody Homer, established the Leroy W. Homer Jr. Foundation, which provides scholarships to young people interested in careers in aviation, which is really cool. So, yeah, alright, so then the last story I have is about someone who's very heroic and actually saved 2 people.
Oh, wow.
To get under, he was a police, he was part of the police department.
The NYPD?
So, yeah.
Okay.
So,
the NYPD is the New York Police Department.
New York Police Department, yeah. So he actually won the highest honor from the New York Police Department for helping to save the lives of 2 other officers. So on 9/11, he was assigned to the emergency service unit. So the day before, he went to work to do a midnight tour, and he was just on his way home to Long Island on a train when he heard a radio show talking about a plane that had obstructed the World Trade Center. And he said he couldn't see what they were talking about because he was on a train and he was listening to it, and he couldn't grasp it. At first, he actually thought it was a joke, like this can't be happening.
Yeah.
And he was confused and didn't really know what was going on, so he got into his car and raced home. And he was expecting to just go home that day and kind of like relax and have a day off, but he knew he was like, it's my duty to like serve my country, like I have to go out there and save people. So he ran into the house and turned the TV on, and he said that at the time he knew we were under attack. When he looked at the TV, he realized, I need to get back to work. Even though he wasn't on duty, he was like, I need to get there. So he raced into Manhattan and got to his building and was assigned to a rescue team to search for survivors. So in the evening, Strauss would notified that Port Authority Police Sergeant John McLaughlin and rookie officer Will Jamera were trapped beneath 30 feet of rubble. That's
oh my god.
So, like,
that
30
could crush your, like, organs and stuff.
They would have died if it weren't for them, definitely. So Strauss and his team ventured over there to help, and it took more than 3 hours to rescue them. That's a lot of effort. And he said when reflecting on the experience, he gets very emotional. He said, quote, "You better believe I wanted to get out of there, but I don't think I could have left them and gone home to my kids knowing I'm left them." So he's like, it was a bad situation. I wanted to get out of there. He was putting himself in danger to be there, but he's like, I couldn't just leave. I had to save them, right? And he said it was tough, but being a part of that rescue helped me survive emotionally and personally. I helped someone get home to their families.
That's really nice. That's a touching story.
So, all right. Now we're going to talk about long-lasting effects.
Which is kind of related to like the mental things of it. And I have like 4 main lasting effects that I want to talk about. So the first one is a good one. Actually, I'll probably talk about this one last because it's a good one.
Okay.
But I want to talk the first one, which is action, which I kind of classify this as like the actions brought by the government,
like
because
federal actions.
Federal actions brought by the attacks. So less than a month after 9/11, the U.S. troops invaded Afghanistan in an attempt to like dismantle Al-Qaeda.
Right.
And so they actually, President Bush, who was like the president under this time, he was very upset, understandably, and he really wanted to like get the Bin Laden killed, which we talked about in the first one.
Osama Bin Laden,
So this military involvement, which we were talking about in like 5 news updates, actually ended this August, but it was because of the 9/11 attacks, and it was the longest war in U.S. history. So after 9/11, the budgets for defense-related agencies also skyrocketed. Homeland Security's discretionary budget jumped from about $16 billion in 2002 to more than $43 billion in 2011. And meanwhile, the budgets of like all the other, like the Transportation Security Administration, the Border Control, Coast Guard, they've all doubled since 2011. So they're really trying to like up their precautions and up like their
and make sure this doesn't
safety
happen
measures.
again.
And so, over the last 20 years, millions of young U.S. soldiers have been deployed overseas to help combat the Afghanistan and Taliban rise to power.
Which, again, we've talked about.
And they return home with, like, debilitating physical and mental injuries, which could be, like, PTSD, like Celine was talking about, depression, anxiety, etc. And in all of these post 9/11 like operations, some 7,000 American troops have been killed in Afghanistan and Iraq, according to like the U.S. Bureau, and as well as hundreds of thousands of Afghani and Iraq citizens, as well as contractors, journalists, troops, and like opposition. And there have been 52,000 people from Afghanistan who have been wounded while trying to fight American troops, or like American troops that have been wounded. And there have been so many different like traumatic brain injuries, PTSD, etc.
Yeah.
So that's awful.
It is.
And along with this is like airport security reform.
Oh, right.
Insane.
We've had to become way more cautious.
Before 9/11, you could bring knives on the plane. You could bring.
Really?
Actually, how the hijackers took over was using box cutters. They used box cutters to like threaten people,
Seriously?
and because those were allowed at the time, you were allowed cigarette lighters, box cutters.
You'd never be allowed that now.
Yeah,
Absolutely not.
and even like body scans were a thing ever. Like
Oh my
you
gosh.
didn't have to show your ID most of the
I
time.
mean, I think it is good that we have more security now
Yeah.
because it's definitely important, right? Because stuff like this happens.
Yeah, and they also have to like do a lot more screening. And in the 9/11 attacks, the TSA was like instructing new security procedures and managing screenings at every commercial airport checkpoint in the country. So it was really severe. Like just comparing things, they're so severe. And I also now I want to talk about like racism and how it plays a role in this.
Because I think the Islamic religion was sort of like people misinterpreted it and started making generalizations about Muslims and that religious group.
So like along with this like comes with the immigration before I kind of like get into that. But immigration was like severely restricted, which is understandable because of like the terrorist attacks. They were from immigrants. But also what they did in result of that was that they were many innocent people who like wanted to escape their country's dire situations weren't able to immigrate. It was so strict that so many people were just like sad and also I have like a personal story. So my mom, her parents are from India. She immigrated here before 9/11 when she was a teenager, and so did my dad. But my mom's wedding was like in February of 2002,
right?
Which was like after the 9/11 attacks, and her own dad couldn't come to her wedding, and neither could her mom, because after the attacks happened, they put so many restrictions and slowed down everything to the point where they couldn't get a green card.
Even get in. Yeah.
So she had to experience that, and she said it was so sad for her because she wanted her dad and mom to be there. Like, I mean, can you imagine your parents not at your
Everyone
wedding?
wants their parents at their wedding, unless like.
So that's devastating. I mean, immigration was just insane there, and hate crimes was insane. I actually would like to talk about like the Sikh community in specific, because the Muslim community obviously faced a lot of like flashback, but the Sikh community, which has like nothing to do with Islam and like they have nothing to do, but they actually, a part of their religion is to wear turbans, which a lot of people associated with Al Qaeda. They were subject to so many hate crimes. Like after the 9/11 attacks, the Sikh coalition actually documented over 300 cases of violence and discrimination against Sikh
even though they didn't even have anything to do with it. Right?
And by the way, Sikh is like a religion.
It's a religious group.
And so 10% of Sikhs in the San Francisco Bay Area reported being like the target of hate crimes. People were denied jobs because of this. Actually, a person was not able to like become a police officer in the NYPD because he wore a turban due to his religion. A person named Frank Singh was called a terrorist and fired by an AutoZone store because he refused to remove his turban. Many people have been called terrorists. Like, people I know have been called terrorists because of their religion, Muslim or Sikh.
That's so sad.
And there's just been so much profiling of people just because they look like
I think it's because it was so traumatic that people now are like generalizing a group based on a small group that isn't representative at all of the whole population.
And it has been like insane how many people have just been harmed and wrongly. They have nothing to do with any of this. They're just regular citizens who honestly just want to live their lives in America. Some of them aren't even American citizens that were just born here but just look different. So.
And I just want to say, like, we're not at all trying to like say anything bad about like the Islamic religion or anything. It actually wasn't really the religion. It was just an extremist view and like a lot of actions that led up to it. It's not anything to say like the religion is bad or anything. It's just an interpretation of violence and.
The people that started Al Qaeda, they aren't like the rest of the world's Muslims. They put an radical perspective on
very
it.
extreme.
So other Muslims, that people who live in America, their friends, they don't believe in any of what they
Exactly.
It's like some groups of Christians even, like they perform the Capitol riot. You know, that doesn't mean that all like white people are bad.
Exactly.
So it just kind of like depends on like certain groups. So you can't generalize people.
Yeah. So.
All right. The last one I want to talk about of the lasting effects is unity. And I think this is one of the best effects of 9/11. And although we regret 9/11, we wish it never happened. We wish we took the precautions previously. They also helped us in becoming a legacy for Americans and bringing us together. Yeah, because as much as like the pain that was inflicted by the event, it makes us come together and like grieve together, and it gives us the sense of unity.
I think it was like a shared experience that everyone in the country was suffering from, so we were able to band together and help each other, and I think that's amazing.
Yeah, and it taught us so many valuable lessons and was able to like get us to reform things. It was able to help us kill the leader of the Al-Qaeda. It was able to help us put forward so many steps in securing the safety of our country.
Yeah, so I think now, like looking back on that, obviously we wish it never would have happened, and there were a lot of negative effects coming out of that, but I think there were also a lot of brave people and a lot of people who are, were able to come together and so I think it's important to recognize that.
All right. So that concludes our 9/11 episode.
Do you have any last words to the world about it?
Just please don't generalize people, and also we are so sorry for anyone who ever had to go through that.
Anyone who lost someone, anyone who knows someone who lost someone, anyone who was anyway connected or involved in it. Yeah.
Just we give our respects to you, and you are brave for going through that.
And strong.
And if you know anyone who has been going through that, ask them, reach out, because they might need help.
And don't be afraid to get help.
Yeah.
So, and also I think talk about it. I think as a society we need to talk about this stuff.
Yes.
I don't think we should just ignore this. Post a story about it on your Instagram. Talk about it.
Yeah.
I think it was really good how on 9/11, 6th grade, some of my teachers talked about us.
Yeah.
And in 7th grade, my social studies teacher showed us videos, and I think that was good.
And also, I feel like a lot of people know the general idea, but they don't know the details. And so, watching documentaries, like I said, are very entertaining.
Listening to podcasts, and I feel like as much as we can focus on the good things that have happened in our country, we need to recognize the pain that we have experienced, so we can help the people who have experienced that pain and work towards becoming a united society. All right, so thank you so much for listening. Please spread the word about this and talk about it. Share your experiences. If you're up
you
for
can
it.
share it with us on Instagram.
We'd be happy to hear.
Our @ is @weare_youth.org. And we can also email us or check out our website where we talk so much about this stuff. All of our sources will be linked in the bio.
Yeah, and today's a hard day, but I'm hoping the best for everyone who's struggling with it.
And we pay our respects to everyone.
Yes.
All right.
All right. So thank you so much for listening. We're actually posting a news update this week, but we're not going to talk about 9/11 in that update because we already talked about it in this episode.
And it will be posted on Wednesday instead of its usual Monday.
Yeah. So all right. So bye. Wait.